Congress has just reached a $1.1 trillion budget deal that's going to stop a looming government shutdown that was possibly going to happen. They've done an interim 1 week budget deal, and now they've got the big one that will fund the government at least until September. You'd think with a dollar value that high, you'd get farther than September, but that's how America works. But interestingly, in this budget
you have to pay
deal,
the housekeeper though.
Exactly, it's incredibly expensive. But what's interesting about this budget deal is that there's actually quite a bit to like in it for liberals. Not everything. The Republicans do control every branch of government at this point. But the liberals in some ways have gotten more than Donald Trump has. And so I want to break down some of those ways that liberals have sort of won out. I mean, overall, we've got no defunding of sanctuary cities, which is one of the things that Donald Trump said had to be in the eventual budget. We don't have that. Additionally, several $100 million in funding for Puerto Rico's Medicare program. So there was the possibility of that being shut down by lack of funding. He didn't want that to go to them. It is going to them. And then here you have a bunch of other, I mean, we've put it in one graphic. But any one of these are absolutely massive differences between the initial proposal from Donald Trump and what we actually get. Now, we may not like some of the final bill, but in all of these cases, it's better than what was proposed. I mean, look at that overall, 30% cut to the EPA. That's not by chance the first thing. An absolutely massive cut both in dollar value and manpower for the EPA. There will still be a cut of 1%, and understand that theoretically we should be funding it more. So that's effectively a larger cut than what we could have had under a different president. But that allows it to continue in roughly the same form, although with terrible leadership. A 30% cut, I mean, and losing thousands of employees, that fundamentally risks taking away their ability to fulfill their core functions of regulating environmental pollution, scientific research into climate change and things of that sort.
Yeah, I know it's kind of chic to, in this seat on this table, to sort of, begrudge the Democrats at every turn. The Democratic minority is doing a pretty good job of fending off a lot of this stuff. When you think about Donald Trump, and a lot of Republicans had to come to the table too, who are not crazy about this president. But the Pentagon, he asked for, what is it, a $54 billion increase in the Pentagon? He's getting an increase, but he's not getting that much.
Yeah, it's a 12.5 billion with a possibility of a couple more $1 billion.
Right.
It's defense, so why not throw a couple more billion?
Right. You left off the National Institutes of Health, something that they said they would cut. Not cut. Planned Parenthood,
and
I think,
additional funding.
Yeah, additional funding. I think that
I think $2 billion.
You have to put a big Sharpie underline under Planned Parenthood.
Yeah, so I believe that's up on there.
That was on there.
That was a huge priority, and Donald Trump had pushed for that, but a lot of other Republicans had pushed for it as well.
Yeah,
and actually, one of the reasons I want to focus on that is, so as Michael pointed out, obviously the Democrats are in the minority in both houses right now, fighting to stop some of these changes. But you also had, as you said, a lot of Republicans who didn't want to make those changes, or some of them that might have ideologically wanted to make some of these changes, but they understand the repercussions because we're already racing toward a midterm election. Midterm election typically doesn't go well for the party that just won the presidency. And then when you combine it with the fact that some of these programs are incredibly popular, people love Planned Parenthood. It's possibly the most popular organization of its type in the country right now. They don't necessarily want to be the ones who help to cut it. Cutting the EPA, you know what people like? Their kids not being poisoned by the environment. Cutting the EPA, incredibly unpopular, and it should be unpopular.
Have a kid. I have one.
I don't have a kid. I don't want my dog being poisoned.
You don't want other people's kids.
Speak for yourself. Yeah.
I don't want his kid being poisoned. And so this really speaks to the power of both public opinion broadly, the fact that we know that these programs and these organizations are popular, but also the huge amount of activism that we've had across this country since the inauguration. I mean, we had specifically the Women's March. Planned Parenthood support for that was a big component of that. The March for Science, the climate march that just happened this week. I mean, when you have millions of people in the streets, politicians, even dense, stubborn politicians, they do see that, and that might have shifted some people on the Republican side, and maybe even some libs as well, to not support some of the massive cuts.
Yeah, listen, there was a real groundswell. I'll let you speak in a second, Thompson. But there was a real groundswell of people phoning their representatives, going to these town halls, giving an earful, which helped Republicans. I think there's also an air, this is pretty nuanced and it's early, but I think there are Republicans who are weighing how much they want to support this president heading not just towards 2018, but towards 2020. I think there's a Republican Party that's stronger than people think that would be fine seeing this presidency end and then moving on to another one. So I think that has a lot. So Republicans, of course, did a lot, and I think these town halls were extremely important.
Yeah, that you make a great point. I mean, sort of the groundswell that they could see in the streets and at the town halls. I mean, it's beyond the presidency, though. The Republicans look at Planned Parenthood and the EPA, and they put a big target on both, I think. Probably a bigger one in terms of a target on Planned Parenthood, but this president has put the target on EPA. I mean, and it's a real one, and he has undone already a lot of things, and now he does this. Or I don't think he does anything. I think he's utterly inept and crazy, and he's upstairs watching Fox News or something. But his henchmen begin the process of coring the EPA, and they try to do it with money. So this is a key thing to see that it wasn't defunded in the way that Trump wanted.
Yeah, and of course this doesn't mean that the EPA is in a good spot. It's led by a climate denier, a guy who fundamentally seems to despise science and all that it reveals about the world. And every week there's another executive order attempting to open up more public lands for drilling and mining and selling off to corporations and all that. So it's still a rough position, but it would have been much worse with a 30% cut. That theoretically they could still sneak in September possibly, but for right now, thankfully it didn't happen. We should also acknowledge he wanted funding for the border wall between our country and Mexico. That is not included. In fact, the amount he wanted extra for border security was halved. They're going to be adding $1.5 billion. And as well, he wanted this massive, almost $20 billion cut to non-defense spending. Instead, they're increasing non-defense spending by about $4.6 billion, which is amazing considering that the party that passed this are the ones of limited government and everything, but more power.
Right. I mean, if you think about the Republican House and a Republican Senate, and this is the budget that a Republican president gets through, that is embarrassing for the Republican president.
But as you said, that speaks to the resistance they're getting politically.
I would imagine so. I mean, that's not overt, but I think it's starting. And I do think that, if you watch Donald Trump on the campaign trail, everywhere you went, I went, whoever went, you heard Donald Trump speak. You heard him talk about Planned Parenthood and this wall. And the first budget that comes up, nothing. I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Now, of course, look, if you're looking for things to not like about the budget, I mean, the fact that we're increasing defense spending by another $12 billion when we already have by far the most bloated military budget in the history of the world, that is an insane waste of money, and it's a waste of money with consequences. That money theoretically could go to reinforcing and strengthening the EPA or the NIH or the NSA or any number of other organizations. I mean, we could be putting that into, instead of canceling the Let Girls Learn program, which we're going to talk about in the second hour, we could be putting additional funding to that or other foreign aid projects. There's so much that we could be doing with the money, and instead we're again throwing hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars away at the military. But increases to military spending are just something, at this point, you're going to get that under Democrats, you're going to get that under Republicans.
That's a conversation we would have been having, Trump or not Trump. We would be saying,
exactly.
I can't believe
it might have been that large if it was Hillary Clinton.
Right. And when you hear military, I know that there are these idealized visions of men and women out there defending our shores. But the truth is, if you really want the wasting of spending, go to the Pentagon. That is one of the most wasteful administrative aspects of Washington life. You can, and the stories of wasteful weapon systems to toilets are epic, right? So when you look at throwing that much more money, and as John says, it could have been earmarked for so many other things, but you just look at it going to this wasteful agency, it really makes you just disgusted with this administration.
But there's no way to look at it as a lib and not say, with a Republican president, House and Senate, that this isn't a better budget than most would have envisioned going in. So they're the old silver lining.
Yeah, well, one other little bit of waste, much smaller than the waste that Mark was talking about in terms of the Pentagon, but still annoying, an additional $131 million for Secret Service to cover the president's protection demands. Now, of course, the president deserves and needs protection. They've always had that. He already had that funding. But perhaps if some of his family was willing to live together and didn't need to be hundreds of miles apart, and he didn't need to fly to a resort every single weekend, we could have saved that little bit of money. Maybe that could have gone to something
maybe they'll
good.
build a country house for him. A place that he can go on weekends that's already got a security apparatus in place that he could get to very quickly.
It'd be like going to
Only
camp.
some place like that existed already.
Membership helps fund the Young Turks. One great thing about that? that means we're not accountable to anyone but you guys. That's why we're strong together, because we built this show around you. Come build it even bigger and better at tytnetwork.com/join.